and thank all of you that have tuned into this. At the time of the American Revolution, Thomas Paine said, "These are the times that try men's souls. These are the times that try the souls of Jews, of people who support Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish." On October 7th, as we all know, probably 1,000, maybe even more Hamas terrorists crossed into Israel and wreaked havoc. They killed, they burned people alive, they raped, they destroyed property, and so on. This is the meeting of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. The man who saw that meeting and warned about it was none other than a man that I consider to be perhaps the greatest American of the 20th century. And that is Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., always a friend of the Jewish people, always working on behalf of our causes, Soviet Jewry, civil rights, support for Israel. It was the good Reverend who said, very explicitly, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And that's what took place on October 7th. Hamas did exactly what it said it would do. Its charter in 1988 called for the destruction of the state of Israel and an attack, a slaughter of Jews wherever they may be. And if you want to see a more nuanced view of that, but not terribly nuanced, you watch on television and look at the pro-Palestinian supporters in the streets. And some of them carry signs. And the signs say, "We want a Palestine between the river and the sea." What some people don't understand, but everybody should understand, is that when they talk about a Palestinian state between the river and the sea, they are talking about the river is the Jordan, the sea is the Mediterranean, and there is no room for the state of Israel. Hamas, both in theory and in practice, is a genocidal organization. It wants to murder Jews wherever they may be, and it wants to destroy the state of Israel. Make no mistake when you see these people demonstrating in the streets. If they support Hamas, then you know exactly what they are supporting. But also keep in mind, forgive me for repeating myself, when you see a sign that says, "We want a Palestinian state between the river and the sea," those people who carry that sign want the destruction of the state of Israel. Now, the question arises, and it's always a very difficult question to answer, is timing. That's the thing, timing is the thing that drives historians absolutely crazy. Why did the American Revolution begin in 1776 and not in 1766? Why did the French Revolution begin in 1789 and not 1779? Timing, periodization is always very difficult. I'm not the sage. Jeffrey gave me a compliment. I'm really not the sage from Schenectady. I don't have a monopoly on the truth. I would suggest to you, as I say to my students all the time, perception is everything. That is, it's not what was real that is important. It's what people think is real. That's what's so terribly important. As Hamas looked at Israel before October 7th, I think Hamas saw weakness and vulnerability. The weakness and the vulnerability stemmed from the turmoil in the streets of Israel. Proposals for judicial reform elicited ferocious responses. And I must tell you parenthetically, this is not the time to bash Netanyahu. Too many speakers, including the Wizard of Oz, Thomas Friedman in the New York Times, they bash Netanyahu. Certainly Netanyahu deserves a great deal of the blame for what took place, but this is not the time to do it. Here's the surest thing in the world. When this is over, there'll be an Israeli investigating commission, and they will place blame where blame should go. So it was, I think, turmoil in the streets. I think it was, of course, the calls by thousands or the statements by thousands of Israeli reservists that we're not going to go. We're not going to be called up. We're not going to go for retraining. Now, as everybody knows, or you don't know, you should know, that when the crunch came on October 7th, all of those reservists did what they had always done. They went to their units and they fought, and they defended the people, and they died in defense of the Jewish people. So, but again, it's the perception that counts. That's what's so really important. And of course, there was something else. Remember, It seems like another world. There were people talking at the time about a rapprochement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And everybody was praising the Abraham Accords. I think Hamas struck in order to simply undermine, torpedo this growing rapprochement between Israel and the Arab world. I think they have succeeded, but only, I think, momentarily have they succeeded. Because the fact of the matter is the Saudis are not cozying up to Israel because of a great growth of philo-Semitism. That's really not the issue. The Saudis are very much concerned about Iran. They want an American security guarantee. They want, which is problematic, the ability to use nuclear energy for civilian resources. That's a problem that Israel and the United States have to work out. But as the Saudis know, as indeed most Arab states knew, as Anwar Sadat knew back in 1976, and that is the road to Washington, D.C. goes through Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. That is, there will be no Saudi rapprochement with Israel unless the Saudis are prepared to indeed, again, go along and make peace with Israel. So it will not take place. So although momentarily it looks like this is gone, it is not gone forever. Because the pressing Saudi demand is, of course, some sort of security guarantees against Iran. So taken all together, I think this is why it took place at this particular period of time. Now, what I'm talking about is really journalism. That's not history. Sometimes you have to have perspective. Maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, we'll have a better understanding of why Hamas acted as they did. But again, this is anti-Semitism plus anti-Zionism leading to the slaughter. Ideology is important. And the fact that so many people in Gaza have been inculcated with an absolutely ferocious genocidal anti-Zionism linked with this anti-Semitism, that's what you got on October 7th. As to the Israeli response, it was absolutely abysmal. We have to be honest with ourselves. The Israelis took their eye off the ball. They missed the prize. They didn't catch what was happening. Now, again, an investigating commission, after all of this is over, will probe and will find certain things. I suspect they will find the following. The Israelis were so wrapped up in the terrorism that was coming from the West Bank, when a number of Israeli men, women, and children were killed by knife-wielding people and people carrying machine guns and ordinary pistols, that they thought that the real problem was in the West Bank. Also, again, coming back to the turmoil in the streets over the judicial reforms, again, the Israelis were not focusing. Just as in our personal lives, if you focus on one thing, you leave some of the other important things, you leave them by the wayside. But there's something else here, something more fundamental. It's what the Israelis call the conceptia, the conception. It was a flawed conception. The Israelis knew, those in high places in Israel knew what Hamas stood for. They knew what the potential of Hamas was. Yet they thought they could reconcile Hamas or put Hamas in a place where it would not be in its advantage to launch an attack upon Israel. That is, the Israelis allowed 18,000 people from Gaza to come into work in Israel each day. Now we know that the detailed information about the kibbutzim, about Israeli timetables, military timetables, and a lot of that was provided by those people who worked in the kibbutzim, the people who came from Gaza. To put it even more fundamentally, the Israelis thought that they could reconcile or tame evil. Hamas is unmitigated evil. The Israelis thought they could manage it. They were wrong. For those of you who think that economics determines politics, let me suggest to you that it's politics that determine economics. The point being here is it didn't make a damn bit of difference whether the people in Gaza were going to benefit from an easing of tension with Israel. Hamas was and is hell-bent on destroying the state of Israel and in murdering Jews. So it didn't make any difference. Hamas is not concerned with the well-being of the people in Gaza. Surely if it was, it would have understood that what they were doing would elicit a ferocious response from Israel and put the people in Gaza in a very difficult situation. Where were the tents? Where were the medical supplies that Hamas should have stored? Because it knew what was going to come for the people of Gaza, but it didn't give a damn. It was concerned with destroying the state of Israel, weakening the state, and murdering Jews. There's also something else here that I think becomes very, very significant, and that's the weakness of intelligence. And what do I mean by that? The Israelis relied on technology, on sophisticated satellites, all sorts of things, all sorts of cyber techniques, all sorts of technology. It is an axiom among those people in the intelligence world that no amount of technology, no amount of sophistication is as good as having one of your people highly placed in the highest echelons of the enemy. Israel probably, from what I've read and from the people I've spoken to, Israel played down the personal contact here, played down the idea of having spies in the Gaza Strip, of having informers in the Gaza Strip. Israel relied on the technology. And in the world of intelligence, technology is not enough. You have to have the informers. You have to have the people in the high places. Israel did not have that. So the failure of the conceptia, that is, the belief that you could tame evil, and of course, the failure, of course, to really use traditional spy techniques. Give the devil its due, that is, Hamas was able to circumvent some of the technology using primitive techniques. Lead is handed from one person to another, not using the phones, not using computers. They did it, again, hand to hand, person to person. That's how they did it. And that's how they were able to get in. Succinctly put, the Israelis rallied very, very well after this. But it was a disgrace. 6 hours it took, 6 hours for Israeli people, for Israeli soldiers and personnel to come to the aid of the kibbutzim on the border. That is almost unforgivable. The Israelis will have to deal with this. And to put it in another way, if you want to really see this in the broadest in the broadest vision, Israel failed in its fulfillment of the Zionist dream. The basic position, the basic obligation of every government in history, in the history of humanity, is to protect its people. And remember, I am sitting here, it's easy for me to criticize, I understand this. But every Israeli is going to have to confront this. As one Israeli said, am I back in a Lithuanian pogrom? Is that what it is? The bottom line of Zionism was always to protect the Jewish people. And the Israeli government failed to do that. And that's what many Israelis are going to have to reckon with. So, again, why Hamas did this, what the timing was, Israel's response, and then we come to the ancient Russian question. Что делать is in Russian. That's what Russian revolutionaries asked in the 19th century. What are we going to do? And it's not an easy thing to give an answer in this particular case. I suspect, or I suggest, that there are three basic issues that the Israelis have to deal with. One is they've got to get the hostages out. That's an important thing. Two, they have to destroy. That's the most important thing. They've got to destroy Hamas, and they have to create a credible deterrent. That is essential. That is what has to be done. And I believe the Israelis are going to do that. But then the question is, as everybody knows, this is a thing that everybody is talking about. What do you do the day after? What do you do when you get the hostages back? Hopefully they're all alive. When you get the hostages back, what do you do then? Should Israel occupy Gaza? Well, you can make a case for it. That is, that's the way you guarantee that Gaza will not be a springboard for an attack upon Israel. But if the Israelis occupy Gaza, they'll pay a blood price. A number of Israelis will die from people in Gaza who'll kill them. It is as simple as that. In addition, there's the burden of taking care of Gaza. Medical supplies, food, all sorts of things, a tremendous burden. So the Israelis are going to have to make a decision. Is there another option? The answer is yes. Of course, there's another option. And that is that somebody else occupies Gaza. But then you have forced to ask, who is it? Who's going to occupy Gaza? Will it be a UN force? Will it be a force from another country? I don't know the answer to this. I really don't. The only thing I know with certainty, and as citizens of our wonderful country, I must tell you, we must do everything possible to make sure that American soldiers are not part of any contingent that serves in the Gaza Strip. We don't want a situation where American soldiers are killed and some of the, let us say, less friendly elements in our country will then say, look, it's because of the Jews that American soldiers are being killed. If the Israelis want to occupy or not to occupy, that's an Israeli call, not an American call. And I would hope, I must tell you, that President Biden has been magnificent, absolutely magnificent, in his defense of the state of Israel. And we must make sure, as citizens of this country, that he does not force Israel to stay its hand. The hostages have to come out. Hamas has to be destroyed, and there has to be a creditable deterrent. Now, in talking points, you're going to hear, because I hear it all around, it's all because of the blockade. If there wasn't a blockade on Gaza, this terrible thing, these events of October 7th, would not have taken place. That is absolute nonsense. Or to use the Yiddish expression, this is narishkeit. It's absolute silliness. The fact of the matter is, nothing justifies what was done on October 7th. No cause, no grievance justifies what was done on that day. And the fact of the matter is, again, there was a reason for the blockade. In the Second Intifada, Israel had what it had done. Israel had suffered 1,000 dead. Throughout the 90s, Israel was suffering dead, attacks by Hamas. Hamas was murdering Jews. Hamas was murdering Israelis. Hamas has in its charter the destruction of the state of Israel. Of course, Israel was going to blockade Gaza. Of course it was. Because if the blockade wasn't there would be more advanced rockets. And Hamas would be even better armed. And it wouldn't be 1,000 or 1,500 Hamas terrorists that really crossed into Israel with paragliders and on motorcycles. It would be tanks, long-range rockets, and all of the heavy artillery that you can imagine. The blockade was justified. And please keep in mind that there would never have been a blockade had Hamas amended its charter in a significant way and not carried out the attacks upon Jews and not called for the destruction of the state of Israel. So the blockade, there should be no guilt about the blockade. Most important of all, whatever happened in the blockade, it did not justify those absolutely abominable events that took place on October 7th. As to the blockade now, well, what can I tell you? If people come to you and say, what about the poor Palestinians? The proper reply is, what about those poor Israeli hostages and American hostages that are being held in an underground tunnel and who knows what's happening to them? All of this could come to an end if Hamas seized its rocket fire and, again, was prepared to release the hostages. Then all of the suffering of the poor Palestinians, it would not take place. Are they suffering? The answer is yes. And so too, remember, never forget, sear it into your mind what happened on October 7th and what is happening to the hostages in the tunnels. So the charge about the blockade, forget it. And then there's the charge that Israel is an apartheid state. Israel is not an apartheid state. There's no doctrine of inequality here. Israeli Palestinians, as they now call themselves, they used to call themselves Israeli Arabs, but Israeli Palestinians are equal before the law. There is no legal discrimination against Palestinians, Israeli Palestinians, within the Green Line. When one goes behind the Green Line, it is also not an apartheid state. Is there a wall that separates? Surely there's a wall that separates. Because on the other side of that wall, from Jenin and Ramallah, and all of these places on the West Bank have come terrorists, Palestinian terrorists killing Israelis. So again, be very, very careful. Don't be gun shy. Deal with these points that are being raised against us. So what is to be done? For the most part, it's an Israeli call. And then we come to what is, as one of my students at a rally said, after I'd given a talk, somebody asked, what are really the roots of all of this? Where does it all begin? Now, that's hard to say where it all begins. Suffice it to say, if we deal with the modern period, I think I've said to you before, those of you who listen to our earlier programs, and I say it to my students. I teach one of the courses I teach is a course on the modern history of the Middle East. And I tell the students when we get to the issue between Israel and the Palestinians and Israel and the Arabs, I say to them that both sides have legitimate claims to what the Arabs call Philistine and what we call Eretz Yisrael. The Arabs have a claim. They've lived there as a vast majority for over a millennium. They have a claim. And we too have a claim. This is the land of David. This is the land of Solomon. This is the land of the prophets. This is the land of the temples. This is where our people entered history and contributed to history. And the fact that they were not there in large numbers has a consequence of two things. That is the destruction by the Romans, the taking of slaves, the killing of large numbers of Jews, and the taking of slaves and bringing them to Rome. On the other hand, while the Muslims occupied, the Arabs occupied this country, the area in the 7th century, what we call Jews, again, Eretz Yisrael, they call Philistine, they did not forcibly convert Jews. They did not do that. What they did was to put heavy taxes on people, restricted their occupations, and a fairly large number of Jews converted to Islam under that pressure. So once again, the point being here is that both sides have a legitimate claim. So how do you get out of that? What's the logical thing to do? And the answer given by the British and the United Nations was that you divide Palestine, you partition it, west of the River Jordan into an Arab state and a Jewish state. The first time that was proposed was at the Peel Commission in 1937, which issued the Peel Partition Plan, partitioning Palestine west of the River Jordan into a Jewish state and an Arab state. I must tell you, sadly, that both the Jews, both the Zionists in this case, and the Arabs rejected it. For the Jews, for the Zionist movement, it wasn't enough. We weren't getting enough. For the Arabs, nobody has the right to alienate a single inch of Arab land. But then the Zionist movement changed its mind. And it's at this time, in a lecture, that I turn to my students and say, why would the Zionist movement change its mind? What's the background here? And the answer to the background is, on January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power and put a whole series of discriminatory acts against the Jews, and large numbers of Jews in the tens of thousands were fleeing Germany, Austria, and later the Sudetenland, and later Czechoslovakia. They needed a place. And the Zionist movement, even before what was happening, the Anschluss and what was happening, taking with the Sudetenland, took the position, the correct position, that we have to have a place. No matter how small it is, we have to have a place for these Jews who are fleeing. The Zionist movement changed its mind, too late. The Arabs were consistent, and they said there was nothing, absolutely nothing. Nobody had the right. The Jews shouldn't settle there. It's all of Arab land. Then on November 29th of 1947, the UN General Assembly, in a majority, passed Resolution 181, partitioning again Palestine west of the River Jordan into an Arab state and a Jewish state. This time, the Zionist movement didn't make the mistake. Mainstream Zionists grabbed on this. And the Arabs, consistent as they always were, it's our land. Nobody has the right, and certainly not the Jews, at the Himi, the Jews of a legitimate but inferior religion. The Jews do not have the right to have a place in even a truncated part of Palestine. That's where history turned. Had the Arabs and the Palestinian leadership, had they accepted Resolution 181, had they accepted partition, there would not have been that cycle of wars. It would not have been there. There wouldn't have been a single Palestinian refugee. Yes, Israel has made mistakes. Yes, there is justice on both sides. Yes, this isn't a real morality play. But again, history could have turned on November 29th of 1947. There could have been a Palestinian state. And in the period afterwards, every attempt by Israel including attempts by previous prime ministers to acquiesce in the creation of a Palestinian state, has always met either with disapproval and rejection or with simple absence and silence. The students at Union some years ago invited Prime Minister Olmert to come to the college and speak. He was no longer prime minister. And he gave a good speech. And it was he talked tachlis. And he said he met with Abbas a number of times. That's Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestine Authority. And they negotiated. And Olmert presented something to Abbas, something I think that was so, in the field of concessions, so dramatic that I'm not sure, had Abbas accepted it, that the Knesset would have accepted it. Olmert gave Abbas and the Palestine Authority control over the Temple Mount. I'm not sure the Knesset would have accepted it. And Olmert told 800 students at Union College, Olmert said, I never got an answer. I never got a written answer. He never called me. So Israel has made overtures, and other governments, England in 1937, the United Nations in 1947. Every attempt by Israel to agree to the creation of a Palestinian state and end the quarrel once and for all was rejected. What Arthur Ruppin, a German scientist, a German sociologist, said in German in 1931, what Moshe Dayan said in 1968, is what I'm going to say to you in English, and it gets right to the crux of the problem. In English, it runs something like this. What we can get from the Arabs, we do not need. What we need from the Arabs, we cannot get. Nobody in the Arab world at any period of time was prepared to agree to even a small Jewish state in Palestine. That is the issue. It's the most important issue of them all. And as I told the students at the speech at Union, I told them all of this could have come to an end. If the leaders of Hamas did what Anwar Sadat did back in the 1970s, the conflict would be over. Remember, those of you who are old enough, remember Sadat coming off the plane, 1977, remember? Then he goes to the Knesset and he says, it's over. Enough blood has been shed. Enough blood has been shed. Give me back the Sinai. Give me back every inch that was lost in the Six-Day War in 1967, and we will have peace. I will recognize Israel as a legitimate state of the Jewish people. I will recognize the state of Israel. And you know what? Menachem Begin, the right-wing prime minister, who had sworn on a pack of Bibles before Sadat came, we won't give him back to Sinai. We'll hold on to Sharm el-Sheikh. We'll hold on to El Arish. It's our buffer area. There's oil here. There's oil here. We will settle people there. The same Menachem Begin who said that, said as he came to America, to put it in language that Israelis would understand and what American Jews would understand. This is peace not between Israel and Egypt. This is peace between Israel and Mitzrayim, the ancient Egypt as well as the modern Egypt. Begin understood what had to be done. Sadat understood what had to be done. There's nobody on the Arab side that is prepared to say what is to be done. No one there is prepared to accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel. When an Arab leader emerges and says, enough is enough, give us an Arab state and we will accept you as a Jewish state, then and only then will the hostility in the Middle East come to an end. So, I'm going to do something now that my mother, may she rest in peace, would never agree to. But Mom, I got to say it because it's a special time. My mother used to tell me, don't tell other people how to spend their money. She's right. But this is a special time. You forgive me. Please forgive me, all of you that are listening. But because in this special time, I believe certain things have to be said. Every Jewish charitable dollar should now go to the state of Israel, either directly through Federation, directly to organizations in Israel, to American organizations that support the state of Israel, whatever it may be. This is not the time for money to go to museums, not the time to go to art galleries, not the time to go to orchestras, not the time to go to symphonies, not the time to go to theaters. Israel is in danger. It lives in a perpetual state of siege. Money is the artery of war, Napoleon said in the early 19th century. Money very often has been the artery of Jewish survival. Money has to come to help those families that were traumatized on October 7th. Money has to come to build the houses that were destroyed by Hamas rockets. And remember, it's always guns and butter, right? We all learned this in an economics class. Israel must in fact be armed to the teeth, but it also has to provide for the social welfare of its citizens. This is where we American Jews and all supporters of Israel, that's when we make our play. That's when we come in. Many, many years ago, at a more difficult time, at a very, very difficult time in the history of the Jewish people, during the Holocaust, a rabbi got up and said, you know what he said? If you have a rendezvous with destiny, you better make sure you come on time. This is our time. This is the time to come to the support of the first and only Jewish state in 2,000 years. I thank you for listening. I really do. I know you're there because you want to support the state of Israel. So thank you very, very much. And now, my friends, the floor is open. Let it rip.
As always, Professor Berk, thank you for your time and your insight. And yes, you are correct. We have already been flooded with probably more questions than we can get to, but we will try to get to as many of them as possible. As a reminder to everyone, there is a function within Zoom, the Q&A function, where you can post your questions. I'll moderate, and we will try very hard to get to as many of them as we possibly can. I'm going to start actually with a question from Don Weinstein, who writes, first a comment. My hunch is that by a ground offensive into Gaza, Israel will attempt to create a quote-unquote demilitarized zone between Gaza and Israel, similar to the Korean model. Ridding Gaza, and for that matter, all Palestinian areas of Hamas, is of course another issue, probably more problematic. My question is, do you think that there is any way for Israel to create or instigate an internal Palestinian uprising or civil war in Gaza to eliminate Hamas internally? For instance, by establishing livable enclaves in Gaza supported by Israel, which would hopefully demonstrate to the Palestinians the humanitarian side to Israel's response and stimulate anti-Hamas sentiment among the reported majority of Palestinians who we are told are against the violence and just want better living conditions and a more secure future. Perhaps this thinking is naive.
I'm going to be as gentle as I can. It was very well stated, very well articulated. But I think, forgive me, Mr. Weinstein, forgive me, I think it is naive. Let me address this issue that you hear all the time. People say the Palestinians in Gaza are innocent victims, that they never support. Most people don't support Hamas. That's what we hear all the time. Can anybody prove that? How do you know? Yeah, public opinion polling. Actually, some of the opinion polling that we have indicates that large numbers of people in Palestine and Gaza do, in fact, support Hamas. No authoritarian government in all of history could have survived without the support of significant elements in the population. I know. Yeah, how did the Nazi state survive? Because of Auschwitz? Because of Dachau? Because of fear? No one would say that now. All of that was a factor. But the German government, the Nazi government of the Third Reich, had the support of large numbers of Germans. So I think the idea of creating a Palestinian civil war, where people in Palestine will oppose Hamas. No, the best that you can get is if the Israeli deterrent is of such a magnitude that when it's all over, People will say in the Gaza Strip to Hamas, enough is enough. We can't take this anymore. But a struggle against Hamas by Palestinians, I don't think that's in the cards. But what our questioner did say, in point, that's a possibility, creating a demilitarized zone. Yeah. If it could work, that would be good. But then again, how do you guarantee the demilitarization? Maybe you can't. Does it mean that in the demilitarized zone, you shoot everybody, anybody who crosses in there, anything that moves and walks and talks? No, that may have to be. I think the best that you can hope for is the two things. One, an occupation of Gaza, not by Israel, and again, certainly not by American soldiers, by either a UN contingent or somebody else from somewhere else. That's the best that you can get. And again, I think that the questioner was quite right, the possibility of a demilitarized zone. So naivete to a certain extent, but again, a very well articulated question.
Professor, we have so many questions to get to, but just curious your take as we sit here on October 24th, and as of before this program, the Israelis have not yet begun the ground incursion into Gaza. What is your take as to why? I mean, is this simply because of the hostage situation, why they have not begun the ground incursion? Is this a leadership issue on the Israeli side that they're not sure what to do? Is it the concern about Hezbollah in the north? What's your take on why it hasn't actually begun?
You put your finger on all of these things. One, what we don't know, what you and I don't know, are negotiations going on for the hostages. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if the Israelis feel that they're meaningful negotiations. That's one thing. The other is for Israel to go in. I mean, this was proposed many years ago, that Israel should go in, clean out Hamas, and occupy Gaza. Well, forget about the occupation. To take Gaza, to go in, as some people are saying, is the worst type of fighting. Street to street, house to house, knife to knife. It will mean anywhere between 400 and 600 dead Israelis. And please, my friends out there, know the disproportionate, the lack of parity in population. The United States has about 70 times the population of the Jewish population of the state of Israel. So what we're talking about is, when I say that it'll cost the Israelis, let us say, 500 dead, we're talking about 35,000 people, the equivalent of 35,000 Americans. So on the one hand, a negotiation's going on. Two, it's going to be a real bloodbath for the Israelis to go in. And three, Jeffrey, you are correct. What about Hezbollah? Hezbollah is another genocidal organization. And if you want to see what Hamas could have become, had there been no blockade, look at Hezbollah. Hezbollah is now reputed to have 150,000 rockets. But unlike in Hamas, those rockets are heavier with a greater payload, and they are more precision guaranteed. So, again, all of these things are taking place. I think any Israeli government, from the left to the right, would have to reckon with all of these things. These are the times when I must tell you, Jeffrey, I am absolutely delighted that I'm a professor of history at Union College, that I am the defense minister or the prime minister of the state of Israel.
So that's a great segue. Let's move to college, as you have that beautiful image from Union College behind you. Bruce Lerner and many others write similar sentiments. How do we balance freedom of speech, critical to our American open society, with the lies and anti-Semitism that is flowing from college campuses, including professors?
All right, that is another loaded question and a very good question. Let me tell you, in the backdrop is the Knott Memorial, the 16-sided building at Union College, a beautiful building. Union has a beautiful campus. But I must tell you, with burning sorrow, I'm teaching at Union 56 years. I'm embarrassed, almost ashamed by Union College. And for those of you who are listening to me, are Union alumni or the parents of Union children, you should listen to me very closely. There are over 200 faculty at Union. Only 2 ever approached me after October 7th and said they were sorry. Only two. In addition to that, at a speech that I gave, Chabad had organized a speech. It wasn't a pro-Israel speech, although I gave what essentially was a supportive thing for Israel, a speech for Israel. A young woman stood up, an Arab woman, native born. And she actually comes from Niskiuna, near the town in which I live. Several days before my speech, there was a bingo. Chabad ran a bingo game to raise money for Israel. In the aftermath of that bingo game, this young woman posted on the media, on the internet, that everyone who attended that bingo game should burn in hell. In my speech, I didn't call her out by name. I said, this is the type of thinking that we should not have at Union College. Her response, she stood up. And she said, I'm the one that posted it. They should burn in hell. Presumably, that every supporter of Israel should burn in hell. I dealt with that as best as I could. And I think I had an impact upon students who were there, saying that the name of union, a union for all peoples, all religions, all faiths, all ethnicities, that type of thing doesn't belong there. The vice president of academic affairs was in the audience. She didn't reproach the student. She didn't rebuke her. This is bad leadership at the college. Students at Union, some Jewish students, are frightened. I myself now have to be concerned with security, that some Islamic fanatic doesn't come in and put a knife in my gut. It's an issue. And the president of the college, in a faculty meeting today, as he usually does, congratulated himself on how he handles situations, did not mention a word about what that student had said, that we should burn in hell. This is what's happening all across America. And when you give, again, when you think of your colleges and universities, we have a debt to all of them. I myself, I went to schools, I have a debt to them. But I'll be damned if I'll give a dime to the University of Pennsylvania, where I did my undergraduate work. When you think of your colleges and universities, think of how they behaved, how their administrations behaved. Now, as to why all of this is happening, that's the $64,000 question. Here I date myself when I talk about that, use that phrase. That's the question. Why is this the case? Some of it is led by Arab students. Some of it is. But that's a cop-out on my part. A lot of it is ordinary students who are influenced by professors, who look at the world through a left-wing prism and use all the tropes of the left. Israel's a colonial state. Israel's an apartheid state. All of these things. My colleagues, they'll go to the wall for the oppressed people of the world. Only for them, the Jews are not oppressed. White privilege is what you hear. All I can tell you is we live in a marketplace of ideas. There's not very much you can do except to combat those ideas. You got to fight it on every front, on everywhere, in the universities and in the newspapers. It is, to use the old language, a shanda that the Washington Post, the New York Times, and even the Wall Street Journal, which is very sympathetic to Israel, when they talk about Hamas, they talk about Hamas militants. These people are not militants. They're terrorists. Everybody should know that. And so, again, in a marketplace of ideas, you can only use ideas, never violence, never violence. You defend ourselves, we defend ourselves as best we can, physically if necessary. And of course, again, in that marketplace of ideas, we are right. Our cause is a just one. Do not be afraid to support the state of Israel.
All right, a lot to get to, questions about Russia and China and Iran. We'll get to those in a second, but I've got three in a row that are all interrelated. Heidi Duncan writes, destroying Hamas will create a whack-a-mole effect. Is it really possible? To go along with that, Harriet Actman writes, Hamas is buying time with letting a few hostages released. What is it buying time to do? This is one heck of a game of chess. And finally, Jill Barron writes, once Hamas is wiped out, can't it grow back?
They're all good questions, and they're asking me things, and I'm willing to give you speculative answers. Well, I cannot give you a definitive answer. Hamas probably bit off more than it can chew in taking the hostages. It's got these older people, these older men and women, and some people with chronic diseases. What are they going to do with these people? Going to allow them to die there? That'll look awfully bad at the end. So you let them out. Hamas is playing for time that the anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic elements in American society and elsewhere will force Israel, force the United States, force the European countries to put pressure on Israel to make this come to an end. So will Hamas come back? The answer is yes. I mean, I'm giving all analogies are flawed, and this is a flawed one I'm going to give you, but just I think it makes the point. Plato used to say, only the dead have seen the last of war. Only dead Jews have seen the last of anti-Semitism. And only dead Israelis have seen the last of Hamas. What has to be done, I don't think we can completely eliminate Hamas, but Hamas can be weakened to the point where it no longer poses a very difficult threat. That's what the aim should be.
All right. Stacy Boyarsky wrote a few questions. I'm going to ask this one. Does Professor Berk have an opinion as to how Israel let this happen? It seems like they have one of the best defense and intelligence departments in the world. So I just don't understand why no one was protecting the border, which of course we know that's not correct. People were protecting the border, and as you said, they died in doing so. And before I let you answer, I listen to a lot of podcasts. That's just what I do when I have some time. And I had a wonderful analogy the other day, talking about aviation security. How do plane crashes happen? It's never one mistake, right? It's the analogy is Swiss cheese. It's the Swiss cheese model. And the problem is you have all of these layers, these safety layers, and when you have that accident, it's when the holes line up in the Swiss cheese that you have an accident. And it seems, at least in looking at this, that this is what happened here. Everything lined up in the worst possible way for what happened on October 7th to happen. But would love your insight.
Jeffrey, I thought I had addressed that issue. And that is the Israelis had taken their eyes away from what was really significant. Remember, I talked to you about concentrating on the West Bank, getting concerned with the judicial reforms, and that conception that Hamas could be tamed. You make the people of Gaza, make them a little bit more prosperous, and it'll be a disincentive for Hamas to launch an attack because it would undermine their own people. It would affect their own people. We didn't understand. You can't negotiate with evil. Hamas doesn't care about what happens in Palestine, what happens in Gaza. It doesn't care about that. It wants to destroy Israel. And Israelis didn't understand that. They didn't understand that this is an evil, this is a genocidal organization, doesn't care much for its own people. What it really cares for is the destruction of the state of Israel. And then I had made the point, forgive me, I'm repeating myself, but the question was asked. The best intelligence in the world is not as good. All that technology is nowhere near as good as having a man or a woman highly placed in the highest echelons of the enemy. Israel did not have that. And it didn't have it because the reports coming from people who are involved in intelligence, both inside in Israel and outside of Israel, is that the Israelis rely too heavily. The number of people that both, not only in Israel, but in the United States as well, and in Great Britain as well, is that, again, the reliance on technology, not on human intelligence. All of this comes into play. And again, you gave that analogy with Swiss cheese. There's a military adage that runs something like this. He who defends everywhere defends nowhere. You can't defend every place. The enemy will get through. But you have to have the capability to quickly respond. once the enemy gets through. So I'm trying to, I think I'm answering the question for the second time. It's a valid question. It's a good question. I'm trying to answer it in the best way that I know how.
All right, let's zoom out a little bit. We've got several questions that deal with the broader issue. Of course, I wouldn't be the first to say, is this the gateway to a larger war? Some people are, talking about something very, very substantial. I've got a few things that I'll say here. Andrew Gluck writes, Biden gives mixed signals. He supports Iran, and he is the reason this happened because of his appeasement and weakness. That is obviously an opinion. We'll deal with that in a second. Joel Sherman writes, isn't the core of the issue Iran? Why not go after Iran? And to round all of this out, Lorraine Rice writes, what's your feeling about Iran, China, and Russia in this war?
All right, 3 related questions. The Russians probably had a hand in this. They probably want to do 2 things by having a hand in this: deflect attention away from what is happening in Ukraine, and 2, to spread America very, very thin. We have a problem here. We are right in supporting Ukraine. We are right in providing the equipment there. But what is happening is we're spread thin. If, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen soon. If it does happen soon, well, you can blame it all on me. I was wrong. At the present time, China does not have the naval capability to cross the straits and launch a ground attack against Taiwan. They have only 2 aircraft carriers. We can blow them out of the water. But that's going to change. In several years, that's going to change. So China is a threat. There is no question about that. Now, Jeffrey, let me say to you, what about Iran? That's the question that people are asking, right? That's what everybody's asking. Iran, of course, had its hand in this. Iran provided money, weapons, and training. There are some people like President Biden who say, well, we don't have definitive evidence that they helped plan this. I think they helped plan it. I can't prove it, but again, this is not mathematics. This is not chemistry and physics. We don't have the hard evidence. Maybe a year, 2 years, 5 years from now, we'll know about that. But Iran had a very substantial hand in this. As I tried to say, Iran is dedicated. You want the questions concerning Iran? Iran is like Hamas. It wants to destroy the state of Israel. The 2 Ayatollahs, Khomeini and Khamenei, have both called for the extermination of the state of Israel. It should disappear from the face of the earth. There's a digital clock in Tehran that counts down from the year 2040, minute by minute, because the government of Iran says that Israel will have to be destroyed before 2040. So after saying all of this, again, what do? Let's deal with President Biden here. As I said in the talk, President Biden has been absolutely magnificent in supporting the state of Israel. I'm a little nervous now about, I think I perceive his attempts to stay the hand of Israel. Israel has got to be able to get the hostages out. You get them out by diplomacy, get them out. Hamas has to be destroyed, and that's to be a credible deterrent. Now, President Biden is not responsible for what happened. Hamas is responsible for what happened. I don't think was the wisest thing on President Biden's part early on, before this, to let some of the sanctions lapse. That was a mistake. But if you want to understand a transcendental question, it's the same thing with Iran that we have to deal with Hamas. It is, how do you deal with evil? How do you deal with it? Can you tame it? Can you manage it? Can you negotiate it? The Israelis cannot do with Hamas. I'm not sure Iran can be dealt with in that way. I really am not. I take, again, for those of you who are refugees from political science classes, you all know the name George Kennan. In the aftermath of Stalin's betrayal, of the promises that he made at Yalta about allowing free elections in Eastern Europe, coalition governments with non-communist political parties. He betrayed all of that, kept large numbers of Red Army soldiers in Eastern Europe. And what did Kennan say? What's that policy of containment all about? You draw a line in Europe and you tell the Soviets if they cross that line, that's war. And you hang on that line until the Soviet Union is no more or the Soviet Union has changed its policy. Can you do this with Iran? Here's my fear. I am not saying this will happen. I am not saying this will happen. My fear is that extremist Islam, which has no moral bottom whatsoever, and is present in Tehran, that a number of Islamic extremists will someday come to the conclusion that 120 kiloton weapon over Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, and Israel ceases to exist as a viable state. And these people are so fanatical, knowing full well that there will be an Israeli response, may be prepared to see the deaths of millions of Iranians as long as Israel is obliterated. Iran is a threat to Israel and is an existential threat to Israel. Iran is a threat to the United States of America as well, and all of its allies everywhere. And again, forgive me for, I'm not being cute here, but forgive me for saying, this is why I'm glad I'm a professor at Union College and not the Secretary of Defense of the United States or the President of the United States. Someone has got to make a decision. Do we really believe that we can deter Iran from attacking Israel or our allies? Do we believe economically and politically by sanctions that we can deter them? If you believe that, then you pursue those policies. If you do not believe that the possibility of a nuclear strike from Iran, emanating from Iran, is possible, then there has to be a preemptive strike. Who's going to do it? I don't know.
I said at the beginning, Professor Berk, that this feels very much like, listen, Israel's been through conflicts before, but this feels different. It feels like a tipping point, and it feels like Israel is at the cutting edge or the bleeding edge of what is really a civilizational conflict here. Do you have the, none of us have a crystal ball, as you're fond of saying. Do you have the sense that this is, in the end, a year from now, 2 years from now, we're going to look back and see this as a contained conflict, or there's a high likelihood that this is spilling into something much bigger?
I think, Jeffrey, again, I'm not a prophet, Jeffrey, but I think that 2 years from now, whether it is the perception is correct, we will believe that we have contained Iran. We will believe that. Now, if you listen to people out there who are listening to my talk here, this is not a happy talk. It really isn't. But it's not all gloom and doom. We've been through worse times before. We really have been. We now have a powerful Jewish state that can defend itself. It pays a blood price. We've been through this before. And unlike the earlier times, we are not alone. There are many good Americans, many good of our compatriots, non-Jews, who are rallying to our cause. In a recent poll, I thought it should have been more, but again, we'll take what we can get. 42% of the American people, when polled and asked, whom do they support, Israel or the Palestinians? 42% said they support Israel, 3% they said they supported the Palestinians. I wish more would have said that. Probably most Americans just aren't concerned, or they haven't been able to make up their minds. But 42% against 3% is not bad. We are strong. We live in the greatest country in the world, a free and democratic society. Our institutions are still democratic institutions with a small d. And I think we are not, some of us, I think, on the front line may be in some danger. I worry about the students at colleges, the Jewish students at colleges and universities. I worry about that. It would be foolish of me not to worry about this. But I believe that the Academy, in the final analysis, will do the right thing. It will condemn all of this anti-Semitism. It may take a little pressure. That's why I'm saying to you, when you look at your universities and the colleges that you went to, see how they behave, express your point of view, and money walks and money talks. So I am optimistic about the future. I really am. I regret the blood loss. I feel the tension that is felt in Israel. I worry about the students. But in the end, as I have said to some of you on really through Ayelet, and let me thank Ayelet for making all of this possible. It really is a very good gesture on the part of the Rubtchinsky family. I say to you, in the end, yeh tov. In the end, it will be good. There may be more blood flowing in the water, but in the end, I believe in the United States, and I believe in that first and only Jewish state, Medinat Yisrael, the state of Israel.
All right, Professor Berk, we've got a lot more questions.
I'm here.
We'll ask a couple more, and we'll start to wrap up. We don't want to go too late. Serena Goldstein, this is a lot of us have had feelings of hopelessness and helplessness at this difficult time, and I appreciate your sharing your optimism after. Yeah, it's a difficult time. Serena Goldstein writes, it seems that education has little chance of changing hearts and minds when it comes to Jews and Israel. Of what value, then, do you believe are the number of Holocaust museums around the world? Or I guess you could say, put another way, is this just all of these institutions? Are we just speaking to the people that already believe on our side or hear our story, and there's no way to get through to those on the other side?
Serena and David, good friends, who I'm going to see in a few days. What can I say to you? Those who hate us and those who hate Israel, they are not going to be convinced. No matter what we say, no matter how many memorials, no matter how many films are shown, we cannot convince those who hate us. Forget it. Don't even waste your time dealing with these people. It's the vast number of people who really don't know much about this, who make no commitments whatsoever. These are the people that we want to touch. These are the people who will come to understand that anti-Semitism is a terrible thing, that it leads to slaughter, it leads to Auschwitz, and it's contrary to the best values of any civilization, and certainly of, let us say, the United States of America. You've got to show people what hate can lead to. But again, I'm saying to you, don't waste your time talking about those people who say, we want a Palestine from the river to the sea. You can speak until you're blue in the face. You won't convince them. What we have got to do is to convince those people who ask maybe or wonder, what does it mean, a Palestinian state between the river and the sea? And again, what should be hammered into people, there is no grievance, no cause that justifies what happened on October 7th.
All right, a couple more that are dealing particularly with the young and college campuses, and then we'll start to wrap this up. By the way, a lot of people have asked, will a recording of this be available? We had not been planning to make a recording available, but we did record the program for internally. So we'll talk with Professor Berk afterwards and see about that. A few others have asked about learning with Professor Berk beyond this program. We'll be talking about the possibility of adding additional programs going forward. So we're hearing that feedback, and we'll continue to consider that. Okay, Judy Mizrahi, who has attended many of these programs over the years. I read in the Wall Street Journal that people under 30 are not supporting Israel in large numbers, which is concerning for the future. And related, Robin Kornick writes, I'm curious about how Professor Berk believes these events will or will not impact immigration policy in the US. I'd also like him to go into more lengthy detail about the current college climate. It's a monumental problem that should not be ignored, and that will require a monumental solution, not just one-by-one conversations, which goes back to what I said at the beginning, is it seems very much, particularly as you skew younger, the lens through which people are viewing this conflict and viewing the world, particularly on the left, the progressive left, is the view of oppressed versus oppressor, instead of seeing this as a conflict between the battles of the forces of chaos and those of order, and how do we deal with these problems, Professor Berk?
How do we deal with these problems? Jeffrey. All right, let's begin. I think Judy Mizrachi raised the issue about our young people under the age of 30. That's what the polling data does show. The younger you get, the lesser is the attachment to the state of Israel and to Zionism. That's correct. Now, one of the reasons for that is, I'll put it in another way. I have a good job. I really do have a nice job. I love what I do. The problem is each year I get older, and those students are between 17 and 22. Things that were important to me, things that are important to people who are younger than I, in another generation, they're not important to students who are now 18 years old. How can a student 18 years old respond emotionally to the Holocaust, to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, to the Six-Day War, to the Yom Kippur War? And some of them are caught up in left-wing ideologies, and they see occupation. I've given you an answer. I keep repeating myself on this issue. The one thing I would add here, we live in a marketplace of ideas. We live in a marketplace of ideas. So you combat bad ideas with good ideas. But in addition to that, we've got to toughen up our kids. I say our students, our Jewish students that I have met, they know the story. They know about what is confronting Israel. They know about what Israel has achieved. They know that Israel is a fulfillment of Jewish dreams, but they're not tough. The Arab kids come at you, boom, 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 just like that. Just as that kid, that young woman who got up and said they should burn in hell. Our kids got to be toughened up. When you send a kid off to college, you got to prepare that kid with what our story is, the truth about the Arab-Israeli conflict, and you got to stiffen their backbone to make sure they're not afraid. I was 18 too, a million years ago. I was 18 too. But I know what some of these kids are feeling, although in all seriousness, it was nothing like this. And you have the right, for those of you who are sending children and grandchildren to colleges, stiffen the kids up, but stiffen the administrations up. When an administrator, such as the president of Union College, does not outright condemn this talk about Jewish students or students who supported a rally should burn in hell, that is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. So whatever schools you went to, scrutinize how the administrations responded to that and let them know how you feel. Teach the kids about Israel, about Zionism, about Jewish history. And don't make it all gloom and doom. This is a difficult subject, and this is a difficult time. But we Jews have made major contributions to world history, in science, in medicine, in mathematics, in literature, in philosophy, in music. There isn't an area in which the Jews haven't contributed. But our young people know about that. And then again, go after the administrators. Tell them it's intolerable. Use whatever leverage you can use, because there's a lot at stake here. If the academy is a place where free speech is not tolerated, and where anti-Semitism and racism begin to appear, then we are lost in American society. So we've got to fight for this. Fight for our people and fight for this wonderful country.
Professor Berk, I think we could go on forever, but I think that's a really good spot to end. So I want to thank you, as always, for taking the time to share your thoughts, your insights, and giving us all a little bit of perspective on what's happening in the world today. These are difficult times. We're all going through.
Thank you very much. Listen, once again, I thank Ayelet for doing this, and to my friends, my Canadian friends, who I know are out there. I miss you. I really do. So I want to give credit where credit is due, not only to Ayelet, but I must tell you, at Chabad, I'm not a Chabadnik. I'm not a Chabadnik. It's their ways are not my ways in a number of ways, but credit has to be given. Chabad on my campus, and I suspect on other campuses, has played a major role in generating support for the state of Israel. So too is Hillel. This is a time to support both Hillel and Chabad. These are the ones that are in closest contact with our children and our grandchildren. These are the ones that can help them in this difficult time. So, my friends, shalom uvracha, peace and a blessing to all of you and to the state of Israel. Again, it will work out well. Thank you very much for listening.
God willing. Thank you, Professor Berk. And Am Yisrael Chai. Shalom.
Shalom.